With me now is the Premier of New South Wales, Kristina Keneally. Premier, welcome back. I know you're under enormous pressure, but we haven't seen you behave so angrily before under the needling in the bear pit. What's going on?
Well, I won't sit there and listen to the Leader of the Opposition mislead the House on the contents of a conversation I had with him. It simply was unacceptable what he was saying. He needed to be called to order for what he was doing.
You took the premiership from Nathan Rees less than 12 months ago. He'd poisoned the chalice for you by declaring you'd be a puppet of Joe Tripodi and Eddie Obeid. We've had a string of ministerial departures and scandals ever since, leading to the Penrith by-election loss. Do you accept that it will be impossible for you and Labor to hold on to government next March?
Well, look, there is no doubt that taking on the job of Premier was a tough one. And it remains a tough job, but I don't shirk from doing tough things. And I do this job. I do it because I believe passionately that government has a responsibility to grow public services to support families, and government has a responsibility to care for those who are most in need in the community. And I do this job, and I will fight for those principles of equity and fairness and social justice and economic opportunity, because I believe in those Labor principles. And at this election, we will have a choice. The people of New South Wales will have a choice to make, a choice that has consequences for the future of this state. And what disappoints me to date is that we've seen an opposition completely unwilling to say what they would do if they were elected to government. This week, they put out a 65-page document, commits to not one bus, one train, 1 kilometre of road, 1 hospital bed, 1 nurse, 1 police officer, doesn't even mention child protection or social housing.
We'll get into the policy differences in the next 6 months. This is 6 months out from the state election. Do you accept Morris Yemma and Anna Bligh's diagnosis of a New South Wales disease emanating from your party's culture, which sees focus group research as vital and sees leaders as dispensable if that helps get a positive bounce in the polls?
Well, let me be clear about something. In the past few weeks, I've talked about a platform for change, and I've started that, changing the way our Parliament operates, the sort of behaviour you've seen there. I don't think that befits our Parliament, our question time. And so we've got now a joint committee that's looking at how we modernise and contemporise our parliamentary procedures. I'm changing the way that elections are funded and conducted in New South Wales. And I'm hopeful that despite the sort of mischief-making we've seen from the opposition, that we can achieve that change. And I'm changing the way we select our parliamentary candidates and the team of people I take to the election.
You've written to the party secretary. I wanted to ask you about this new blood. You want to recruit people outside the membership of the Labor Party, people prominent in their communities, to stand?
No, that's been a media interpretation, and if I could say, not entirely accurate. What I've said to the party, I expect a regeneration within our ranks, the right mixture of new blood and experience. I expect that pre-selection processes will be as open and as transparent as possible, as many rank-and-file pre-selections as possible.
With great respect, Premier, who would want to come aboard as a candidate for the Australian Labor Party from within the membership at a time when everybody knows the party is on the way out here?
Who would want to come in? People who hold dear those Labor values of fairness and social justice and equity and economic opportunity.
This is time for true believers now, is it? You're trying to get us back to true believers, that the Labor Party is true believers in New South Wales?
No, I'll tell you what, Quentin, what I am passionate about and what there are Labor members out there and supporters of the Labor Party out there are passionate about is caring for those who are most in need and growing services to support this state. And when I say there's a choice at the next election, there most certainly is. And what we have on one side, Mr O'Farrell unwilling to tell us what it is he will do, unwilling to commit to one new service, and it reminds us of those famous words of Nick Greiner in 1995. When he was in opposition, he said he had the policies he put in the top drawer that he released publicly, and the policies he kept in the bottom drawer that he only pulled out once he was in government. And this is important.
And your party's never been that cynical?
This is important
because... Never been focus group driven? Never decided to get the bounce in the polls and treat the electorate with this sort of disingenuousness?
No, let me be clear. What each political party will need to do in this election is be clear with the electorate what it is they will do, how they will do it, and what it will cost. And since I have been Premier, I have taken that very approach. The Metropolitan Transport Plan, the COAG health reform. It's what we're doing right now with our plan to expand disability services. What we get from the opposition, 65 pages of platitudes. And that's quite simply not good enough, because what does Mr. O'Farrell have in his bottom drawer? What is he not telling us about his plans?
Let's deal quickly with the latest scandal, the ICAC's inquiry into the member for Drummoyne, Angela Demore, with her expense allowance. Is it true that up to 20 MPs have now been investigated for the possible misuse of their entitlements?
Well, Quentin, I read that in the paper just as you did. I'm not privy to that information, and I wouldn't know.
Have your members told you I'm under investigation by the ICAC?
Look, Quentin, I wouldn't be privy to that information, and I wouldn't know. The ICAC undertakes its own processes, and certainly, as the Premier, I don't seek to preempt or to involve myself in them.
An ICAC public inquiry seems to be a sledgehammer to crack a nut in these matters. Before we lose too many more MPs and completely destroy the reputation of the New South Wales Parliament in the eyes of the public, shouldn't there be financial controls in place which stop MPs from even the temptation of even thinking about rorting their expenses?
Well, as I understand these particular circumstances, this relates to whether a particular staff member worked at the electorate or the Parliament. I understand Ms Demore is quite happy and is asking the ICAC to release the private transcripts of her interviews. And I have said this consistently. When these sorts of allegations or questions are aired, the best way that they're dealt with is through a due and fair process.
In recent weeks, the public has seen you personally support in the conscience vote the same-sex adoption bill. You've confirmed the permanence of the King's Cross injecting room. You've signed an MOU with Lord Mayor Clover Moore on a people-friendly city. We know you're a devout Catholic. Where do you stand on secular ethics classes as an alternative to Scripture or SRE, special religious education in all state schools?
I fully support the trial. And if the trial returns with a recommendation that this can and should be implemented, we will do that. Let me be clear that there is no change proposed to special religious education in our public schools. Indeed, my own children go to a public school and take advantage of special religious education that's offered. But I do believe for those children who don't choose special religious education, we have indeed an obligation to consider what else that we can offer them.
Don't you have any sympathy for the churches who say that this, by putting it up against SRE, Scripture, it is giving the secularists a chance to body snatch?
Well, I'd reflect two things. One, we're talking about a 10-week course in Year 5, so that a child can go through public education from kindy to Year 10 and take advantage of special religious education all the way through. What we're talking about is an ethics class, 10 weeks in Year 5. The second thing I would say is that churches are always in the business of contesting their ideas and their propositions in the public square. Isn't that what evangelization is all about?
So they have nothing to fear in competing with ethics classes?
Well, I would say that, one, a 10-week class in Year 5 is hardly an opportunity for secularism to overrun. Secondly, what do churches have to fear in particular with the contestability of their claims? I would say that is precisely what evangelization is, and I thought that was a core business of the church.
I'm sure Archbishop Jensen will be pleased to hear that. Campaign finance reform, just quickly. Both the opposition and the Greens say the caps you've applied in your reforms are too generous. It would not change vested interest or third-party dominance and influence. Is your reform package negotiable?
It is. It is.
And so these caps could come down to make it more democratic.
Absolutely. And I said that when we introduced it. I said, this is the government's response. However, I'm aware that there are a wide range of views across the Parliament, across the political spectrum. Can you get it through before Christmas? Well, I'm hopeful. I believe passionately in these reforms. They follow on from work that I did as planning minister to depoliticise the planning system. I was the first planning minister to delegate away authority to determine applications where political donations have been made.
And the Parliament has made unlawful property developer donations to political parties.
That's correct. That was done by this Labor government.
And there was no cabinet argy-bargy about lifting that?
No, in fact...
That's another media beat-up, is it?
Look, it is entirely. Can I just say, the Cabinet received the recommendations of the Joint Committee on Electoral Matters. One of the recommendations of that committee, which included Labor and Liberal members, national members too, was to repeal the ban on developer donations. Of course, the Cabinet looked at the recommendation from the committee, but we made a decision not to proceed with it.
Premier, when will you sign the heads of agreement for the construction of the Parramatta to Epping rail link with Prime Minister Gillard's government?
Well, in fact, we're very close to that. Since the government was formed, and in fact, I believe it was the day after the government was formed, we had the first meeting to set out that heads of agreement. We're very close to that.
So Parramatta to Epping is on?
Absolutely. $2.1 billion coming from the Commonwealth. I would say any government would be crazy to walk away from that sort of investment in our city's transport system.
Well, Barry O'Farrell might if he's the Premier next March.
Well, that would be
He'd stick to his priorities.
That would be a great blow to this state, a great blow to the people of Western Sydney, a great blow to the people of Epping. This is an opportunity for Commonwealth investment of $2.1 billion. Quite frankly, this is a very good deal for New South Wales, and I would say any government that walked away from that would have to have its head examined. Premier,
finally, in a glossy financial magazine, there is this, published today, there is this damning paragraph. The past year has also seen the parlous state of governance in New South Wales drag the Premier state so far down in influence that Victoria is looking as if it may become the base of power in Australia for some time to come. Premier, isn't this an indictment which would justify the voters of New South Wales dismissing your government?
Well, I don't know who wrote that.
The editor, Stuart Hawkins, editor, Australian Financial Review magazine.
Well, I invite Mr Hawkins to give me a ring and let's talk about what happened at COAG Health Reform, because at COAG Health Reform, Victoria took a position, New South Wales took a position. The position that prevailed nationally was New South Wales.
But it's not the perception in New South Wales and the rest of the industry and business and commerce in Australia that New South Wales is lagging behind. We don't have the dynamism which we once had. I think that's what this editor is referring to. We don't have the dynamism we had.
Can we put some facts on the table here? New South Wales has got the fastest economic growth last quarter. New South Wales leads the nation in the rollout of the federal economic stimulus package. New South Wales' unemployment rate is lower than the national average. New South Wales is leading the retail recovery. New South Wales is leading in job advertisements. And just last week we saw Sydney in New South Wales become not only the host city for Oprah's first visit outside of the US, but also named the best events and festival city in the world. Now, I see people writing articles about how Sydney needs to get its groove back. The reality is the rest of the world is out looking at Sydney, looking at New South Wales, and recognizing what's happening here. I say it's time to stop talking the state down. When we won that award, Barry O'Farrell puts out a press release saying that Sydney had lost its mojo. We just won an international award as the best city in the world.
Does Oprah get here before the election?
Oprah comes in January.
Premier Keneally, thanks very much.
Sorry, Quinton. Oprah comes in December. Her show is broadcast in January.
Premier Keneally, thanks very much.
Thank you.